In one sense, tonight's program is inspired by a photograph. This indelible image was recorded 20 years ago this June. But in another sense, it is inspired by the day-to-day experience of all of us who are associated with PEN and the ACLU. To many critics of our organizations, what we do a lot of the time is complain, carp, bitch, moan. We're called PAIN and the American Civil Liberties Union. But honestly, that's not how it feels to us. Most days, I don't feel like I'm complaining. I feel like I'm celebrating, that I'm learning about and looking for ways to support and protect ordinary people who have taken or are taking extraordinary stands against abuses of power. One of these people is Liu Xiaobo, who was one of the heroes of the Tiananmen demonstrations on human rights and democracy in China. Liu was arrested again this past December for his part in Charter 08, a declaration for greater freedom in China that has been signed by thousands of Chinese citizens. He is still detained on suspicion of inciting subversion of state power and could be sentenced to 3 years in prison. One of the things that distinguishes Liu is the ruthlessness of his criticism, not only of Chinese authorities, but of himself, other intellectuals, and his fellow citizens. The year before the Tiananmen demonstrations, he told an interviewer, "I'm quite opposed to the belief that China's backwardness is the fault of a few egomaniacal rulers. It is the doing of every Chinese. That's because the system is the product of the people. All of China's tragedies are authored, directed, performed, and appreciated by the Chinese themselves. There's no need to blame anyone else. Following the fall of the Gang of Four, everyone has become a victim or a hero who struggled against the gang. Bullshit. What were they all doing in the Cultural Revolution? Those intellectuals produced the best big character posters of all. With the right environment, without the right environment, Mao Zedong could never have done what he did." It says something about where we've been as a country the last 8 years that those words should make us all feel a little uncomfortable. Please take a moment when you go home this evening to sign PEN's petition for the release of Liu Xiaobo. The address is on the postcard that I think you received on your way in. Please join and support the work of PEN and the ACLU, and please join me in welcoming tonight's readers for this evening of literature celebrating the power of one person, one body, one imagination to stand against tyrannical authority. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Esther Bober. I'm from Hungary, and I wanted to be the one who undoes the illusion, but I happen to be the first one to read. So excuse me, and then also excuse my strange pronunciation, my Hungarian accent. I'm going to read in English. I read excerpts from a poem that was written in 1950 by a great Hungarian poet, and then I'm going to read from Tolstoy's Hadji Murat, and in the background you're going to see a video, video images that you might know it was actually not front page, but it was in the New York Times quite a couple of days ago. This is a guy being slaughtered with some others in Bolivia, accused of making an attempt at the life of the president of Bolivia. And I used to know this guy. We went to school together. Because he's half Hungarian, so I want to talk a little bit about him. And just a few words why I chose these texts. I chose this text because I believe the power of literature is to dissipate the illusion of one snapshot, the snapshot being the man, holding up the tanks. That's a snapshot. And I want to fill you in on the details. Okay, so first the poem. In tyranny's domain, you are the link in the chain. You stink of him through and through. The tyranny is you. Like moles in sunlight we crawl. In pitch darkness, sprawl and fidget in the closet as if it were a desert. because where tyranny obtains, everything is in vain. The song itself, though fine, is false in every line. For he stands over you at your grave and tells you who you were, your every molecule, his to dispose and rule. And now, the excerpt from Tolstoy's short story. This is his last short story for those who don't know it, and that's considered to be a masterpiece, his late masterpiece. Hadji Murat is a Chechen warrior. "Who on earth is that?" said Maria Dmitrievna, stepping to the side. The moon was behind the officer, and it was only when he was practically level with them that Maria Dmitrievna saw who it was. The officer was Kamenev, who served at one time with Eva Matveyevich, and so was known to Maria Dmitrievna. "Peter Nikolaevich," she said, "is that you?" "In person," said Kamenev. "Ah, butler, how are things? Not asleep yet? Walking out with Maria Dmitrievna, are you? You look out, or you'll catch it from Eva Matveyevich. Where is he?" "You can hear him," said Maria Dmitrievna, pointing to where there was a sound of singing and a bass drum. "They are having a binge." "Your chaps, is it?" "No, a column is in from Kasavjort, and they are giving them a party." "Oh, good thing. I'll get to it myself. I only want to see him for a minute." "Is something up?" asked Butler. "Just a small matter." "Good or bad?" "Depends who for. It's good for us, but tough on others." And Kamenev laughed. The couple walking, and Kamenev had meanwhile reached Eva Matveyevich's house. Kamenev called one of the Cossacks. "Chikirov, here!" A Don Cossack moved forward from the rest and came up to them. He was in the ordinary Don Cossack uniform, wearing knee boots and a greatcoat, and had saddlebags slung at the back of his saddle. "Get it out," said Kamenev, dismounting. The Cossack also got off his horse, and from one of the saddlebags drew out a sack with something in it. Kamenev took the sack from the Cossack and put his hand in it. "Shall I show you the latest, then? You won't be frightened," he said, turning to Maria Dmitrievna. "What is there to be afraid of?" said Maria Dmitrievna. "There you are, then," said Kamenev, and he pulled out a man's head and held it up in the moonlight. "Do you recognize him?" It was a shaven head with prominent bulges of the skull over the eyes, trimmed black beard and clipped mustache. One eye was open, the other half closed. The shaven skull was split and hacked about, and the nose covered with black clotted blood. The neck was wrapped in a bloody towel. Despite all the wounds on the head, there was in the set of the now blue lips a childish, good-natured expression. Maria Dmitrievna took one look and without a word turned and went quickly into the house. Butler could not take his eyes off the terrible head. It was the head of that same Hadji Murat with whom he had recently spent his evenings, having such friendly chats. How did it happen? Who killed him? Where? He asked. He tried to make a break for it, and they caught him, said Kamenev, and handing the head back to the Cossack, he went into the house with Butler. He died like a real man, said Kamenev. But how did all happen? Hang on a minute. When Eva Matveyevich comes, I'll give you all the details. That's what I've been sent for. I have got to go around all the forts and villages, showing them. Eva Matveyevich had been sent for and came back to the house, drunk with two other officers, also much the worse for drink, and began embracing Kamenev. I've come to see you, said Kamenev. I've brought you the head of Hadji Murat. Go on with you. Has he been killed? Yes, he tried to escape. I always said he would do us down. Where is it then? His head. Let's see it. The Cossack was called and came in with a sack containing the head. The head was taken out, and for a long time Eva Mafia gazed at it with his drunken eyes. He was a fine fellow just the same, he said. Let me kiss him. He was a daredevil chap, that's a fact, said one of the officers. When they had all inspected the head, they gave it back to the Cossack. The Cossack replaced it in the sack, dropping it carefully so as not to bump it too hard on the floor. What do you do, Kamenev? Do you say something when you show it around? Asked one of the officers. But I want to kiss him, shouted Ivan Matveyevich. He gave me a sword. So that was the excerpt. And also, although I could not show you the bloody head of a rebel, I can show you the bloody body of more than one. And the question really is if they are heroes or they are just crazy people. And I don't want to answer this question because I think you have to answer it for yourself. Thank you.
That's bright. Good evening. I'm Ann Beeson with the Open Society Institute. I've chosen a passage from the classic Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. In addition to this book's iconic status as an act of literary defiance and the many acts of defiance by its central characters in the story, I thought that the subject matter of the book was particularly relevant today during the economic crisis as poor people and immigrant workers continue in this country every day to suffer and to rise up and protest against the failures of the state and the excesses of the privileged. Once California belonged to Mexico and its land to Mexicans, and a horde of tattered, feverish Americans poured in. And such was their hunger for land that they took the land, stole Sutter's land, Guerrero's land, took the grants, and broke them up and growled and quarreled over them, those frantic, hungry men. And they guarded with guns the land that they had stolen. They put up houses and barns, they turned the earth and planted crops, and these things were possession, and possession was ownership. The Mexicans were weak and fed. They could not resist because they wanted nothing in the world as frantically as the Americans wanted land. Then, with time, the squatters were no longer squatters but owners, and their children grew up and had children on the land. And the hunger was gone from them, the feral hunger, the gnawing, tearing hunger for land, for water and earth and the good sky over it, for the green, thrusting grass, for the swelling roots. They had these things so completely that they did not know about them anymore. They had no more the stomach-tearing lust for a rich acre and a shining blade to plow it, for seed and a windmill beating its wings in the air. They arose in the dark no more to hear the sleepy birds first chittering and the morning wind around the house while they waited for the first light to go out to the deer acres. These things were lost and crops were reckoned in dollars, and land was valued by principal plus interest, and crops were bought and sold before they were planted. Then crop failure, drought, and flood were no longer little deaths within life, but simple losses of money. And all their love was thinned with money, and all their fierceness dribbled away in interest until they were no longer farmers at all, but little shopkeepers of crops, little manufacturers who must sell before they can make. Then those farmers who were not good shopkeepers lost their land to good shopkeepers. No matter how clever, how loving a man might be with earth and growing things, he could not survive if he were also not a good shopkeeper. And as time went on, the businessmen had the farms, and the farms grew larger, but there were fewer of them. Now farming became industry, and the owners followed Rome, although they did not know it. They imported slaves, although they did not call them slaves. Chinese, Japanese, Mexican, Filipinos. They live on rice and beans, the businessmen said. They don't need much. They wouldn't know what to do with good wages. Why, look how they live. Why, look what they eat. And if they get funny, just deport them. And all the time, the farms grew larger and the owners fewer, and there were pitifully few farmers on the land anymore. And the imported serfs were beaten and frightened and starved until some went home again, and some grew fierce and were killed or driven from the country. And the farms grew larger and the owners fewer. And the crops changed. Fruit trees took the place of grain fields, and vegetables to feed the world spread out on the bottoms. Lettuce, cauliflower, artichokes, potatoes, stoop crops. A man may stand to use a scythe, a plow, a pitchfork, but he must crawl like a bug between the rows of lettuce. He must bend his back and pull his long bag between the cotton rows. He must go on his knees like a penitent across a cauliflower patch. And it came about that owners no longer worked on their farms. They farmed on paper, and they forgot the land, the smell, the feel of it, and remembered only what they owned it, only that they owned it, remembered only what was gained and lost by it. And then the dispossessed were drawn west, from Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, from Nevada and Arkansas families, tribes dusted out, tractored out, carloads, caravans, homeless and hungry, 20,000 and 50,000 and 100,000 and 200,000. They streamed over the mountains, hungry and restless as ants scurrying to find work to do, to lift, to push, to pull, to pick, to cut, anything, any burden to bear for food. The kids are hungry, we got no place to live. Like ants scurrying for work, for food, and most of all, for land. We ain't foreign. 7 generations back, Americans, and beyond that, Irish, Scotch, English, German. One of our folks in the Revolution. And there was lots of our folks in the Civil War, both sides, Americans. They were hungry and they were fierce. And they had hoped to find a home, and they found only hatred. Okies. The owners hated them because the owners knew they were soft and the Okies strong, that they were fed and the Okies hungry. And perhaps the owners had heard from their grandfathers how easy it is to steal land from a soft man if you are fierce and hungry and armed. The owners hated them. And in the towns, the shopkeepers hated them because they had no money to spend. There was no shorter path to a shopkeeper's contempt, and all his admirations were exactly opposite. The town men, little bankers, hated Okies because there was nothing to gain from them. They had nothing. And the laboring people hated Okies because a hungry man must work, and if he has to work, the wage payer automatically gives him less for his work, and then no one can get more. And the dispossessed, the migrants, flowed into California, 250,000 and 300,000. Behind them, new tractors were going on the land, and the tenants were being forced off. And new waves were on the way, new waves of the dispossessed and the homeless, hardened, intent, and dangerous. And while the Californians wanted many things, accumulation, social success, amusement, luxury, and a curious banking security, the new barbarians wanted only 2 things, land and food, and to them, the 2 were one. And whereas the wants of the Californians were nebulous and undefined, the wants of the Okies were beside the roads, lying there to be seen and coveted. The good fields, with water to be dug for, the good green fields, earth to crumble experimentally in the hand, grass to smell, oaten stalks to chew until the sharp sweetness was in the throat. A man might look at a fallow field and know, and see in his mind, that his own bending back and his own straining arms would bring the cabbages into the light, and the golden eating corn, the turnips and the carrots. And a homeless, hungry man, driving the roads with his wife beside him and his thin children in the back seat, could look at the fallow fields which might produce food but not profit, and that man could know how a fallow field is a sin, and the unused land a crime against the thin children. And such a man drove along the roads and knew temptation at every field, and knew the lust to take these fields and make them grow strength for his children and a little comfort for his wife. The temptation was always before him. The fields goaded him, and the company ditches with good water flowing were a goad to him. And in the south he saw the golden oranges hanging on the trees, the little golden oranges on the dark green trees, and guards with shotguns patrolling the lines so a man might not pick an orange for a thin child, oranges to be dumped if the price was low. He drove his old car into a town. He scoured the farms for work. Where can we sleep tonight? Well, there's a Hooverville on the edge of the river. There's a whole raft of Okies out there. He drove his old car to Hooverville. He never asked again, for there was a Hooverville on the edge of every town. The rag town lay close to water, and the houses were tents and weed-thatched enclosures, paper houses, a great junk pile. The man drove his family in and became a citizen of Hooverville. Always they were called that. The man put up his own tent as near to water as he could get. Or if he had no tent, he went to the city dump and brought back cartons and built a house of corrugated paper. And when the rains came, the house melted and washed away. He settled in Hooverville, and he scoured the countryside for work, and the little money he had went for gasoline to look for work. In the evening, the men gathered and talked together, squatting on their hams. They talked of the land they had seen. There's 30,000 acres out west of here, laying there. Jesus, what could I do with that? With 5 acres of that? Why, hell, I'd have everything to eat. Notice one thing, there ain't no vegetables nor chickens nor pigs at those farms. They raise one thing, cotton, say, or peaches or lettuce. Another place will be all chickens. They buy the stuff they could raise in the dooryard. Jesus, what I could do with a couple of pigs. Well, it ain't yourn. It ain't going to be yourn. What we going to do? The kids can't grow up this way. In the camps, the word would come whispering, there's work at Shafter, and the cars would be loaded in the night, the highways crowded, a gold rush for work. At Shafter, the people would pile up 5 times too many to do the work, a gold rush for work. They stole away in the night, frantic for work, and along the roads lay the temptations, the fields that could bear food. That's owned. That ain't ourn. Well, maybe we could get a little piece of her, maybe a little piece. Right down there, a patch. Jimson weed now. Christ, I could get enough potatoes off in that little patch to feed my whole family. It ain't ourn. You gotta have Jimson weeds. Now and then a man crept on the land and cleared a piece, trying like a thief to steal a little richness from the earth. Secret gardens hidden in the weeds. A package of carrot seeds and a few turnips. Planted potato skins crept out in the evening secretly to hoe in the silent earth. Leave the weeds around the edge, then nobody can see what we were doing. Leave some weeds, big tall ones in the middle. Secret gardening in the evenings and water carried in a rusty can. And then one day a deputy sheriff. Well, what you think you're doing? I ain't doing no harm. I had my eye on you. This ain't your land. You're trespassing. The land ain't plowed. I ain't hurting no one. You goddamn squatters. Pretty soon you'd think you owned it. You'd be sore as hell. Then you'd think you'd owned it. Get off now. And the little green carrot tops were kicked off and the turnip greens trampled. And then the Jimson weed moved back in, but the cop was right. A crop raised. Why, that makes ownership. Land hoed and the carrots eaten. A man might fight for land he's taken food from. Get him off quick. He'll think he owns it. He might even die fighting for the little plot among the Jimson weeds. Did you see his face when we kicked them terminates out? Why, he'd kill a fellow as soon as he'd look at him. We got to keep these people down or they'll take the country. They'll take the country. Outlanders, foreigners. Sure, they talk the same language, but they ain't the same. Look how they live. Think any of those folks that live like that? Hell no. In the evenings, squatting and talking, and an excited man. Why ain't 20 of us take a piece of land? We got guns. Take it and say, put us off if you can. Why don't we just do that? They just shoot us like rats. Well, which you'd rather be, dead or here? Underground or in a house all made of gunny sacks? Which you rather be for your kids, dead now or dead in 2 years with what they call malnutrition? Know what we ate all week? Biled nettles and fried dough. Know where we got the flour for the dough? Swept the floor of a boxcar. Talking in the camps, and the deputies, fat-assed men with guns slung on fat hips, swaggering through the camps. Give them something to think about. Got to keep them in line, or Christ only knows what they'll do. Why, Jesus, they're as dangerous as niggers in the South. If they ever get together, there ain't nothing that'll stop them. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jose Dalisay from the Philippines. I'd like to read a couple of short poems from a dear departed friend of mine named Alfredo Navarro Salanga. Like much of the rest of the world, we in the Philippines are cautiously hopeful about the new America that's shaping up under President Obama. But it's probably a bit too soon to forget about the old one that invaded and annexed the Philippines in 1898. And this exchange between two generals, an American general and his Filipino counterpart, has to do with that time frame. General Elwell S. Otis proclaims United States sovereignty over the Philippines in accordance with the Treaty of Paris, December 10th, 1898. By my bidding and mine alone, our eagles commanded to fly over those islands of short brown men. On my shoulders are epaulettes and chevrons of the brightest gold. I come from a golden country. My words are heavy as nuggets. Where they fall, they chip away at what rocks you may have. In brown hand or in brown soul, it will do you no good to challenge the weight of gold. Gold is the heaviest metal. The talons of our eagles are capped with gold. Their beaks are of pure gold. They are trained to gouge out rebel eyes and rip out rebel innards. brown flesh can never hold. But to you who listen to our golden cries for golden peace, let there be gold between us. Pacify the unlettered. Those of you who have been lettered in Spain, do this, and our eagles will look at you as gold and not as brown. Do this, and you will eat meat from their golden beaks, meat gathered by their golden talons. Let there be gold between us. And in response, Emilio Aguinaldo, General Aguinaldo, orders the Filipino soldiers in Intramuros to remain on good terms with the Americans in order to deceive the latter, since the hoped-for moment has not yet arrived. Deception and patience are arts of war. Not all is gunfire and shouting and trumpets. Be like hawks and be like turtles. Walk slowly on land as if weighted down by need to return to wives and homes. But hover in your minds and keep your beaks sharp. Let your eyes be like hawk eyes and imagine where to strike. Remember always the enemy is stranger to coconut, forest, and grass, and knows only stone. Unlike the turtle, the enemy knows no way to hide from heat or eye. Like chicken in open fields, they are easy prey to cleaving. Do not be awed. If they are taller, remember the lesson of the bamboo. In wind and storm, the taller ones bend lower than others. That is the time to cut. In wind and storm is the hoped-for moment for turtles to take wings that all may be hawks with beaks sharpened to cut the trunks of bamboo bending in wind and storm. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nick Flynn. It's really an honor to be reading for the ACLU in Penn tonight here in Joe's Pub. It's hard to imagine America without the ACLU or Penn, what it would be like. I was told that we were going to read in some sort of response to this photograph, the 20th anniversary of this photograph. I think I might have known something about the man in the photograph at one point, maybe 20 years ago. I don't remember anything about him. But the photograph, though, seems to me, it looks like he wasn't planning to do this on this day. It looked like he was planning to do something else, and then it just sort of rose up in him to do this amazing thing. He's got his coat in his hand, it looks like, in a bag in the other. He's not wearing like a, machine gun or something. So I'm going to read 5 poems, 5 short poems that, and a lot of them are not ostensibly about something overtly political or standing up to tyranny, but I think almost any poem, in some ways, the individual doing that, any good poem. This is, the first one's by Lucille Clifton. It's called Jasper, Texas, 1998, for Jay Bird. I am a man's head hunched in the road. I was chosen to speak by the members of my body. The arm, as it pulled away, pointed toward me. The hand opened once and was gone. Why and why and why should I call a white man brother? Who is the human in this place? The thing that is dragged or the dragger? What does my daughter say? The sun is a blister overhead. If I were alive, I could not bear it. The townsfolk sing, "We shall overcome," while hope bleeds slowly from my mouth into the dirt that covers us all. I am done with this dust. I am done. This is next poems by the great American poet Denise Levertov, who did a lot of anti-war poems in the 60s, anti-Vietnam War poems in the 60s. And this is one that's not ostensibly about the Vietnam War, but I think the the tyranny rises up at a certain moment in it. I think of her sort of like, this poem it sort of reminded me of some Emily Dickinson poems, who was also writing in the midst of war. You don't think of her as a war poet, but the Civil War was going on all around her while she was writing. And it bleeds into her poems. This is The Ache of Marriage by Denise Levertov. Thigh and tongue, beloved, are heavy with it. It throbs in the teeth. We look for communion and are turned away, beloved, each and each. It is Leviathan, and we in its belly, looking for joy, some joy, not to be known outside it, 2 by 2 in the arc of the ache of it. It's a poem by Jean Valentine called The Undervoice. As I understand it, most of her poems are written from dreams in some way or another. She's, which I think is really, pretty much all art comes from dreams. The Undervoice. I saw streaming up out of the sidewalk the homeless women and men of East Side of Broadway, fruit and flowers and bourbon. The homeless men like dull knives, gray-lipped, the homeless women, connected to no one, streaming no one to no one. More like light than like people, blue neon, blue the most fugitive of all the colors. Then I looked and saw our bodies, not near but not far out, lying together, our whiteness. And the undervoice said, stars, you are mine. You have always been mine. I remember the minute on the birth table when you were born, I riding with my feet up in the wide silver blue stirrups. I came and came and came, little baby and woman, where were you taking me? Everyone else may leave you. I will never leave you, fugitive. It's a poem by the Iraqi poet Sadi Youssef, whose American publisher is here with us. It's translated by Khalid Matawa. This is the last 2 stanzas of his poem, America, America. We are not hostages, America, and your soldiers are not God's soldiers. We are the poor ones. Ours is the earth of the drowned gods, the gods of bulls, the gods of fires, the gods of sorrows that intertwine clay and blood in a song. We are the poor. Ours is the God of the poor, who emerges out of farmers' ribs, hungry and bright, and raises heads up high. America, we are the dead. Let your soldiers come. Whoever kills a man, let him resurrect him. We are the drowned ones, dear lady. We are the drowned. Let the water come. And the last poem is by Brenda Hillman, who lately, the last few years, in response to the war, sort of the sense of helplessness in the face of the war, has been decided to take some action. She goes to Congress and sits in on whatever you call it they do in Congress. What do? They vote on bills, like appropriation bills. And she sits there and writes poems while she sits in the behind the congressman and writes these poems. She says, and it's also, she hallucinates. She says she goes to Congress and hallucinates. This is called In the Trance by Brenda Hillman. And it's a great honor to read with all these writers also. It's a great honor. In the Trance. A pretty anarchist said to me, it's not that a great love happens. What happened became your great love. Her echo had an ancient glow and so proved buoyant for my little craft. I left the world and felt a world. The bee loading its gloves with powder. The albatross wanting one thing from the sea. Nothing can wreck our boat, said she. And when the water felt the glacier, the future held a present tense. The present held a future without cease. Thank you.
My name is Sok-yong Mehta, and I'm going to read from a letter that Mahatma Gandhi wrote in 1920, which was addressed to every Englishman in India. And Gandhi was famous for saying at one point, he pointed out that there were, at its peak, only about 10,000 Englishmen ruling a country of some 350 million people. And he noted that if every Indian were to spit in unison, they would form a puddle large enough to drown every Englishman in India. He did not say this in this letter. Dear friend, I wish that every Englishman will see this appeal and give thoughtful attention to it. Let me introduce myself to you. In my humble opinion, no Indian has cooperated with the British government more than I have for an unbroken period of 29 years of public life in the face of circumstances that might well have turned any other man into a rebel. I ask you to believe me when I tell you that my cooperation was not based on the fear of the punishments provided by your laws or any other selfish motives. It was free and voluntary cooperation based on the belief that the sum total of the activity of the British government was for the benefit of India. I put my life in peril 4 times for the sake of the empire. I did all this in the full belief that acts such as mine must gain for my country an equal status in the empire. So as late as last December, I pleaded hard for a trustful cooperation. I fully believed that Mr. Lloyd George would redeem his promise to the Muslims and that the revelations of the official atrocities in Punjab would secure full reparation for the Punjabis. But the treachery of Mr. Lloyd George and its appreciation by you and the condonation of the Punjab atrocities have completely shattered my faith in the good intentions of the government and the nation which is supporting it. But though my faith in your good intentions is gone, I recognize your bravery, and I know that what you will not yield to justice and reason, you will gladly yield to bravery. See what this empire means to India. Exploitation of India's resources for the benefits of Great Britain, an ever-increasing military expenditure and a civil service, the most expensive in the world, extravagant working of every department in utter disregard of India's poverty, disarmament and consequent emasculation of a whole nation, lest an armed nation might imperil the lives of a handful of you in our midst, traffic in intoxicating liquors and drugs for the purpose of sustaining a top-heavy administration, progressively repressive legislation in order to suppress an ever-growing agitation seeking to give expression to a nation's agony, degrading treatment of Indians residing in your dominions, and you have shown total disregard of our feelings by glorifying the Punjab administration and flouting the Muslim sentiment. I know you would not mind if we could fight and wrest the scepter from your hands. You know that we are powerless to do that, for you have ensured our incapacity to fight in open and honorable battle. Bravery on the battlefield is thus impossible for us. Bravery of the soul still remains open to us. I know you will respond to that also. I am engaged in evoking that bravery. Non-cooperation means nothing less than training in self-sacrifice. Why should we cooperate with you when we know that by your administration of this great country, we are being daily enslaved in an increasing degree? People flock in their thousands to listen to me because we today represent the voice of a nation groaning under your iron heels. You are in search of a remedy to suppress this rising ebullience of national feeling. I venture to suggest to you that the only way to suppress it is to remove the causes. You have yet the power. You can repent of the wrongs done to Indians. You can compel Mr. Lloyd George to redeem his promises. I assure you he has kept many escape doors. You can compel the Viceroy to retire in favor of a better one. You can revise your ideas about General Dyer. You can compel the government to summon a conference of the recognized leaders of the people, duly elected by them, and representing all shades of opinion, so as to revise means for granting home rule in accordance with the wishes of people of India. But this you cannot do unless you consider every Indian to be in reality your equal and brother. I ask for no patronage. I merely point out to you, as a friend, an honorable solution of a grave problem. The other solution, namely the repression, is open to you. I prophesy that it will fail. Thank you.
Sergio Ramírez, Nicaragua. When power faces the monster of reason, Latin America has never been an exception, and life have constantly been filled with somber and bloody colors. Slaughters, as those told by Garcia Marquez in 100 Years of Solitude, an infinite train of yellow wagons carrying thousands of banana workers' cadavers to discharge them into the sea. Year of 1928. General Maximiliano Hernández Martínez, the dictator from El Salvador, who believed in the transmigration of the souls and in the power of magnetic fluids, locked in the public square of Izalco 10,000 peasants and murdered them with machine guns. Year 1932. The Generalissimo Rafael Leonidas Trujillo, dictator of the Dominican Republic, ordered his army to murder by gunshot and machete 20,000 Haitian banana workers, their cadavers thrown into the river of the massacre in the frontier between Haiti and Dominican Republic. The river had already that name long before. Year of 1937. Dozens of students murdered in the square of Tlatelolco in Mexico as the result of a decision of President Díaz Ordaz because he wanted to celebrate the World Olympics without disturbances. 1968, the year youth rebelled all around the world from Paris to Mexico City. A year to remember. A square, a street full of corpses, secret tombs, unknown collective cemeteries, 30,000 human lives, most of them young students and workers missing only in Argentina, children torn from their mothers' wombs and given in adoption, as attested by poet Juan Gelman's story. His son was kidnapped and murdered in Buenos Aires in 1976, and his wife secretly taken to Montevideo, where she gave birth to a girl before being executed. Hwang found that girl, his granddaughter, after more than 20 years of indefatigable search. 50 years ago, I arrived at the University of León in Nicaragua to study law. Then, on July 1959, a platoon of National Guard soldiers of the Somoza's family's dictatorship opened fire against a rally of unarmed students in which I participated. There were 4 dead and dozens of wounded, 2 of those dead being my classmates. I was then an adolescent, but since then I was never the same. I became a survivor of that horror, and I pawned my own life so that such horror could sometimes simply end. While I continue in the university, each anniversary of that massacre, there was a commemoration, and I recite in the street where my partners had fallen a poem from Pablo Neruda called I Demand Punishment, or The Enemies, which seem to have been written for those of us who lived that afternoon. This point is the one that I want to share with you tonight. Ellos aquí trajeron los fusiles repletos de pólvora. Ellos mandaron el acervo exterminio. Ellos aquí encontraron un pueblo que cantaba, un pueblo por deber y por amor reunido. Y la delgada niña cayó con su bandera y el joven sonriente rodó a su lado herido y el estupor del pueblo vio caer a los muertos con furia y con dolor. Entonces, en el sitio donde cayeron asesinados, bajaron las banderas a empaparse de sangre para alzarse de nuevo frente a los asesinos. Por estos muertos, nuestros muertos, pido castigo. Por los que de sangre salpicaron la patria, pido castigo. Para el verdugo que mandó esta muerte, pido castigo. Para el traidor que ascendió sobre el crimen, pido castigo. Para el que dio la orden de agonía, pido castigo. Para los que defendieron este crimen, pido castigo. No quiero que me den la mano empapada con nuestra sangre, pido castigo. No los quiero de embajadores, tampoco en su casa tranquilos. Los quiero ver juzgados en esta plaza, en este sitio. Quiero castigo. Gracias.
Hi, I'm Sarah Schulman. I was born on 10th Street. I'm going to read something by Audre Lorde, who was a revolutionary New York writer, died in the 1980s. The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action by Audre Lorde, 1977. I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. That the speaking profits me beyond any other effect. I was forced to look upon myself and my living with a harsh and urgent clarity that has left me still shaken, but much stronger. Some of what I experienced during that time has helped elucidate for me much of what I feel concerning the transformation of silence into language and action. In becoming forcibly and essentially aware of my mortality and of what I wished and wanted for my life, however short it might be, priorities and omissions became strongly etched in a merciless light, and what I most regretted were my silences. Of what had I ever been afraid? To question or to speak as I believed could have meant pain or death, but we all hurt in so many different ways all the time, and pain will either change or end. Death, on the other hand, is the final silence, and that might be coming quickly now, without regard for whether I had ever spoken what needed to be said, or had only betrayed myself into small silences while I planned someday to speak, or waited for someone else's words. I was going to die, if not sooner than later, whether or not I had ever spoken myself. My silences had not protected me. Your silence will not protect you. What are the words you do not have yet? What do you need to say? What are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own until you will sicken and die of them still in silence? Perhaps for some of you here today, I am the face of one of your fears because I am a woman, because I am black, because I am lesbian, because I am myself, a black woman, warrior, poet, doing my work. Come to ask you, are you doing yours? And of course I am afraid because the transformation of silence into language and action is an act of self-revelation, and that always seems fraught with danger. But my daughter, when I told her of our topic and my difficulty with it, said, "Tell them about how you're never really a whole person if you remain silent, because there's always that one little piece inside you that wants to be spoken out, and if you keep ignoring it, it gets madder and madder and hotter, and if you don't speak it out one day, it will just up and punch you in the mouth from the inside." In the cause of silence, each of us draws the face of her own fear of contempt, of censure, of some judgment or recognition, of challenge or annihilation, but most of all, I think, we fear the visibility without which we cannot truly live. And that visibility which makes us most vulnerable is that which also is the source of our greatest strength, because the machine will try to grind you into dust anyway, whether or not we speak. We can sit in our corners mute forever while our sisters and ourselves are wasted, while our children are distorted and destroyed. We can sit in our safe corners mute as bottles, and we will still be no less afraid. Okay, thank you.
일로 와. 내가 하고 네가 여기서 책이 있으니까. 나오나? 제가 영어를 하면은 시를 읽는 줄 알기 때문에 제가 영어를 못 하겠습니다.
If I speak in English, everyone thinks I'm reading a poem.
아까 여기 사진이 탱크 앞에 서 있던 사진을 봤습니다.
I saw the photo, a man standing in front of tanks.
1960년대 베트남에서 유명해진 사진이 있죠. 벌거벗고 뛰어가고 울면서 뛰어가는 소녀.
There was a very famous photo from Vietnam in 1960s, a girl, naked girl, crying and running away from the bombardment.
그때 제가 베트남의 해병대원으로 미군 병사들하고 같이 있었고요. 반대편 전선에는 지금 내 친구가 된 베트남 작가 방언인이 반대편에 있었습니다.
At the time, I was serving as a Korean Marine together with the American Marines. And at the other side, a friend of mine, a very famous Vietnamese poet in Vietnam, was killing each other in the other side.
그리고 1980년에 광주 민중항쟁이 있었는데요. 그때 유명해진 사진은 로이타가 찍은 사진인데 어린애가 아버지의 관 앞에서 아버지 사진을 들고 있는 사진입니다.
In 1980, there was a Gwangju massacre in South Korea. There is another famous photo taken by Reuters journalist. A boy around 5-year-old was holding his father's photo who died from this government, military government.
그때 학생들 그리고 노동자들 그리고 시민들이 총을 들고 15일 동안 무장 투쟁을 했습니다. 제가 그 도시에 있었습니다.
I was in that city. Over the 15 days, student, laborers, workers, and civil movement activists tried to demonstrate and protest. Actually, we were fighting for our lives. I was there in 1980 in that city.
그리고 바로 저 사진은 제가 1989년에 북한을 방문하고 어디로 갈까? 미국으로 갈까? 일본으로 갈까? 우리나라에는 돌아가지 못하고 그리고 한 달을 머무르고 있었을 때에 벌어졌던 사진입니다. 저 때도 제가 베이징에 있었습니다.
I was in Beijing in 1989 when it happened. So at the time, I just returned from North Korea. After a short visit, I was in exile in Germany and America.
그리고 나서 베를린을 갔더니 3개월 만에 베를린 장벽이 무너지더군요.
After that, I arrived in Berlin, and soon the Berlin Wall collapsed.
제 얘기는요, 이미지는 순간적으로 지나가는데, 우리는 이미지를 가지고 계속 내러티브를 만들어냅니다. 그리고 그 내러티브를 나중에 소비해버리죠. 그리고 현장은 사라집니다.
What I want to emphasize is that the image is no less than ephemeral one, but we only love the image and reproduce the narratives on and on.
예, 제가 10년 전에 쓴 소설 여러 나라에서 나오는데 미국은 이제 요새 나왔네요. 베트남 전쟁에 관한 소설을 쓰고 이것은 이제 1980년 광주 항쟁을 다룬 얘기인데요. 제목은 올드 가든입니다. 이제 9월 달에 나올 텐데요.
This is the Old Garden, which was originally published in Korea in 2000, and it will come out in English this fall.
이 얘기는 그냥 역사하고 사랑은 문법에서 얘기하죠. 텐스, 시제가 맞지 않는다 하는 것이 주제입니다.
The main concern in this book is that history and love is always in wrong tense. The discrepancies of the tenses in our history and love.
사랑도 그렇잖아요. 그때는 사랑인 줄도 모르고 또 불완전하기도 하고 그런데 오랜 세월이 지나간 다음에 보면 그 사랑이 어느 때 문득 완성돼 있죠. 그죠?
We don't realize if it is really love when we are in love. But if we look back a bit later, we suddenly notice, yes, that was love.
역사도 그렇습니다. 역사도 우리가 그때 바랐던 거와는 달리 엉뚱한 방향으로 세상이 현실화되어 있어요. 그죠?
I think the history is quite similar. At some point, we realize history already changed to the direction we really didn't want, but it already happened.
이 소설은 그런 것에 대한 얘기입니다. 그러니까 죽어있는 여자와 이미 죽은 여자가 남긴 기록하고 살아남아서 오랜 세월 동안 가누고 있었던 남자가 자기 기록과 일기를 통해서 만나지는 못하지만 주고받는 그런 얘기입니다.
This book is about a woman who died outside of prison and a man who spent his 18 years in prison and after that who spent his life to heal and cure himself for his mind and body throughout.
그런 세상의 쓸쓸함과 사랑에 대한 마지막 얘기를 읽겠습니다.
I'd like to read today, and it's my honor to read on this stage, to read the last part of this novel, the letter of the woman and the man's memoir and his thought about the changing history and discrepancies of the tenses in love. Well, personally, I'm very honored to read his book in front of you and at New York. It's one of my favorite novelists, no doubt about it. So I'm very delighted to have a chance to read this for him as well. Yunhee's notes ended there. The last letter among the ones my sister gave me was dated summer of 1996. I remember her last sentence. You in there, me out here. That's how we spend a lifetime. There were difficult times, but let us make peace with all our days. Goodbye, my darling. It took me a few years in solitary confinement to realize, painfully, what our era had meant once it was over. Our various attempts to take control of the government had become outdated or unnecessary. The anti-establishment ideas that were formulated from within the system of capitalism and materialism were distorted during the process of realization. Instead, like a skeletal steel frame still standing among the ruins, a few remaining propositions are more important than ever. In any society, The most lively legacy of the last few hundred years is the defense of democratic principles and the return of sovereignty to the people. They are like the handful of belongings saved from a burnt down house. There should be a continuous challenge to authority for change and reform. Groups of ordinary people should form an alliance to reclaim what was taken by the state inch by inch, like a children's game, and enlarge the territory to the level of practical equality. One summer's day, I went out to the exercise field and found there was commotion everywhere on television, radio, and the newspapers. In the middle-class neighborhood south of Han River, which has prospered since the 70s, a bridge and a department store had collapsed one after the one. Around that time, the government's appearance had changed to a civilian one, but it was, in essence, only a controlled transfer from military dictatorship at the conclusion of more than 30 years of modernization. For days, there were accounts of people who died or who somehow persevered under the fallen concrete and dirt until they were rescued. The media blasted the owner of the department store who had illegally altered the structure, continued to operate the business despite warning signs, and made no attempt to evacuate the customers until the very last minute. Then, various stories about his past came out. Apparently, he had been an agent for the Japanese during the occupation period. The details of his activities were not clear, but he evidently became an officer at the Japanese consulate in Manchuria. After the liberation, he came back to Korea and worked for the American occupiers, and during the Korean War, he became an interrogator of Chinese POWs. In the South, the era of government control, development, and modernization was coming to an end, while starvation and mass escapes had begun in the North. It was the beginning of the last chapter in this divided land. The chaos and changes could go on for a long time on a much larger scale. Would there be anything else left for me to do? If so, it would be a struggle in everyday life. In prison, I had a habit of living in the future, getting ahead in days in order to erase them. At the beginning of each month, I crossed out the whole month on the calendar, and on New Year's Day, I drew a circle around the new year. But the present dragged on so slowly. The news of the changing world outside quietly soaked in from time to time, like the seasons passing shown by dandelion seeds or the yellowed leaves of a willow tree floating through the iron bars. The news might arrive late, but we knew very well what good and evil had transpired in the outside world before the year was gone. We need to start again from that June of 1987, the one we waited for so long with so much hope, yet ended up cursing for years to come. Everyone had been hopeful, but then they lost their hope, and despondent, we splintered into too many fragments. The laborers, the farmers, the students, the intelligentsia, the religious, the poor, the unemployed. The list was endless, and we even had to add the white-collar workers to it. Still, we did not find ourselves not realizing that the true birth of citizenship would occur only when we all got together. It has been less than a month since I was released from prison, and the whole country is going through a serious economic crisis. All I had was a few pairs of underwear that I brought with me from solitary confinement, and I could not imagine what it meant to be poor. The little sparrows sitting on the wire might fly away at once when others approach, and when they come back, They try to reorganize in the midst of confusion. Those who do not quickly participate in this momentary reorganization fly away and are scattered all over the place. Maybe I'm not alone. Thanks very much indeed.
저 이렇게 딱딱한 부분만 있는 게 아니라 메랑콜릭한 부분도 많으니까 나중에 책 많이 보세요.
It's not only this kind of stubborn, serious political things. There are very melancholy, soft love stories in this book as well. So have a look at it by yourself later. Thanks very much.
Good evening. I'm János Térey from Hungary, and I will read a Lithuanian poem in Hungarian. I hope we have the translation in English. Okay, that's great. The title is in Hungarian, mondjátok meg Fortinbrásznak. Időről, hangról, gesztusról lemondtak. Nem kellett nekik a nem várt örökség, csak küszöb alá, szabadságbürök mag. Nem nézték meg a zárófelvonást, és nincs is a világon Dánia. Pihenjenek, megtöltik vérüket, fehérlő szigetek és sóskövek, Konó partjáról szélvihar süvölt, gőzölgő erdők, kert folytó mohája, és nincs is a világon Dánia. Örök lét löki félre, védi őket, és őriz a nyár parti homokot, templomi vitrázsokat, sziklatűrést, elhagyott mezőt, átkozott füzet, és nincs is a világon Dánia. Tandori Dezső fordítása volt egyébként. Thank you.
My name is Paul Verhaeghen, originally from Belgium, now from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm still Belgian, but slightly tempted on January 20th to become an American citizen. The thing is, sometimes, oftentimes, and very often in pressing times, there are no heroes, there's only victims and perpetrators. My own recent work, I've dealt with the Holocaust. It's one of those things where you can only say this happened. We don't know why. We don't know what it means, but it happened. When Primo Levi wrote the first installment of his memoirs in 1946, no serious publisher wanted to publish it. Nobody wants to read this depressing stuff, they said. And they were right for a while. The first edition sold 1,500 copies. Levi's was a tale we were not ready to face in 1946, but it reached us like Elie Wiesel's and so many others for the right reason, because it had to. I'd like to read from the very first pages of the book about the night before the deportation. Everybody in the transition camp knows what that means, but life goes on. Women wash their babies' clothes and hang them on the barbed wire, and therein lies the defiance. And to quote the author's preface, it seems to me unnecessary to add that none of the facts are invented. Chapter 1, The Journey. At the moment of my arrival, that is, at the end of January 1944, there were about 150 Italian Jews in the camp, but within a few weeks their number rose to over 600. For the most part, they consisted of entire families captured by the fascists or Nazis through their imprudence or following secret accusations. A few had given themselves up spontaneously, reduced to desperation by the vagabond life, or because they lacked the means to survive, or to avoid separation from a captured relation, or even, absurdly, to be in conformity with the law. The arrival of a squad of German SS men should have made even the optimist doubtful, but we still managed to interpret the novelty in various ways without drawing the most obvious conclusions. Thus, despite everything, the announcement of the deportation caught us all unawares. On February 20th, the Germans had inspected the camp with care and had publicly and loudly upbraided the Italian commissar for the defective organization of the kitchen service and for the scarce amount of wood distribution for heating. They even said that an infirmary would soon be opened, but on the morning of the 21st, we learned that on the following day, the Jews would be leaving. All the Jews, without exception, even the children, even the old, even the ill. Our destination, nobody knew. We should be prepared for a fortnight of travel. For every person missing at the roll call, 10 would be shot. Only a minority of ingenious and deluded souls continued to hope. We others had often spoken with the Polish and Croat refugees, and we knew what departure meant. For people condemned to death, tradition prescribes an austere ceremony, calculated to emphasize that all passions and anger have died down, and that the act of justice represents only a sad duty towards society, which moves even the executioner to pity for the victim. Thus, the condemned man is shielded from all external cares, he is granted solitude, and should he wanted spiritual comfort. In short, care is taken that he should feel around him neither hatred nor arbitrariness, only necessity and justice, and by means of punishment, pardon. But to us this was not granted, for we were many and time was short, and in any case, what had we to repent, for what crime did we need pardon? The Italian commissar accordingly decreed that all services should continue to function until the final notice. The kitchens remained open, the corvées for cleaning worked as usual, and even the teachers of the little school gave lessons until the evening as on other days. But that evening the children were given no homework. And night came. And it was such a night that one knew that human eyes would not witness it and survive. Everyone felt this. Not one of the guards, neither Italian or German, had the courage to come and see what men do when they know they have to die. All took leave from life in the manner which most suited them. Some praying, some deliberately drunk, others lustfully intoxicated for the last time. But the mothers stayed up to prepare the food for the journey with tender care, and washed their children and packed the luggage. And at dawn, the barbed wire was full of children's washing, hung out in the wind to dry. Nor did they forget the diapers, the toys, the cushions, and 100 other small things which mothers remember and which children always need. Would you not do the same if you and your child were going to be killed tomorrow? Would you not give them to eat today? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jamil Jaffer, and I'm the director of the ACLU's National Security Project. For the last 7 years, we've been advocating for the closure of the prison at Guantanamo Bay. And one of the people we represent is Muhammad Jawad, who is a Pakistani national, and he was 16 years old when he was picked up by the United States in Afghanistan. And he's been held at Guantanamo now for almost 7 years. The most remarkable thing, I think, about his story is the story of his prosecutor, the military prosecutor, whose name is Lieutenant Colonel Daryl Van de Velde. And Van de Velde was a prosecutorial zealot to start with, but very recently he filed an affidavit, a declaration in Jawad's case, asking that all the charges against Jawad be dropped. That may end up ending Jawad's military detention, but it also ended up ending Van de Velde's military career. So I'm going to close the program by reading just a short excerpt from Van de Velde's declaration. I, Daryl Van de Velde, declare as follows. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Judge Advocate General Corps. Since the September 2001 attacks, I've served in Bosnia, Africa, Iraq, and Afghanistan. My awards include the Bronze Star Medal, the Iraqi Campaign Medal, and 2 Joint Meritorious Unit Awards. I offer this declaration in support of Muhammad Jawad's petition for habeas corpus. I was the lead prosecutor assigned to the military commissions against Mr. Jawad until my resignation in September of 2008. Initially, the case appeared to be as simple as the street crimes I had prosecuted by the dozens in civilian life. But eventually, I began to harbor serious doubts about the strength of the evidence. Mr. Jawad was alleged to have thrown a grenade at U.S. troops, but the victims of the attack had not seen the attacker. At least 3 other Afghans had been arrested for the crime and had subsequently confessed, casting considerable doubt on the claim that Jawad was solely responsible for the attack. And I learned that the written statement characterized as Jawad's personal confession could not possibly have been written by him because Jawad was functionally illiterate and could not read or write. The statement wasn't even in his native language. I also found evidence that Jawad had been badly mistreated by U.S. authorities in both Afghanistan and Guantanamo. Mr. Jawad's prison records referred to a suicide attempt, a suicide which he sought to accomplish by banging his head repeatedly against one of the cell walls. The records reflected 112 unexplained moves from cell to cell over a 2-week period, an average of 8 moves per day for 14 days. Mr. Jawad had been subjected to a sleep deprivation program known as the Frequent Flyer Program. I lacked the words to express the heart sickness I experienced when I came to understand the pointless, purely gratuitous mistreatment of Mr. Jawad by my fellow soldiers. It's my opinion, based on my extensive knowledge of the case, that there is no credible evidence or legal basis to justify Mr. Jawad's detention in U.S. custody or his prosecution by military commission. Holding Mr. Jawad for 6 years with no resolution of his case and with no terminus in sight is something beyond a travesty. I've taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and I remain confident that I have done so, spending over 4 of the past 7 years away from my family, my home, my civilian occupation, all without any expectation of or desire for any reward greater than the knowledge that I've remained true to my word and have done my level best to rise to our nation's defense in its time of need. I did not quit the military commissions or resign. Instead, I personally petitioned the Army's Judge Advocate General to allow me to serve the remaining 6 months of my 2-year voluntary obligation in Afghanistan or Iraq. In the exercise of his wisdom and discretion, he permitted me to be released from active duty. However, had I been returned to Afghanistan or Iraq, and had I encountered Muhammad Jawad in either of those hostile lands, where 2 of my friends have been killed in action, and another one of my very best friends was terribly wounded, I have no doubt at all, none, that Mr. Jawad would pose no threat whatsoever to me, his former prosecutor, and now repentant persecutor. 6 years is long enough for a boy of 16 to serve in virtual solitary confinement in a distant land, for reasons he may never fully understand. Mr. Jawad should be released to resume his life in a civil society, for his sake and for our own sense of justice, and perhaps to restore a measure of our basic humanity. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank the readers as well. As Larry said, as Larry mentioned earlier, we hope that you'll come to other Penn World Voices events. There's a full schedule on Penn's website. We also hope that you will join the ACLU if you're not already a member. We're at www.aclu.org. Thanks very much.